now I want to show you a beautiful, colorful vegetable curry. We're going to highlight some South Asian flavors, but make this really approachable for you to do in your kitchen. And as we go through, I'll also try and make some comments about things that could be adjusted if you have different ingredients in your kitchen. So we're going to do a technique first called sauté, and then we're going to simmer later. So I mentioned we're covering sauté, stir fry, simmer, and braise in this session. So sauté, we want to have a warm pan heated up over medium-high heat. And then once it's warm, then we'll take our oil. If you're using oil, if you would like to not use oil, you can double the amount of oil in any of the recipes and use that amount of vegetable stock. So if you're using, for example, 1 tablespoon of oil, then you could use 2 tablespoons of vegetable stock. You're not going to get necessarily the same amount of flavor out of some of the foods. And so that's why in most of these recipes, I'm opting to use small amounts of oil to really bring out the flavor. But you are still going to end up with a very flavorful dish, even if you do it without any oil. So I'm waiting till this oil is shimmery in here, and it's pretty much there. You just want the oil to be warm. That will help prevent food from sticking to the bottom of the pan. So now I have some medium diced onion I'm going to add. You can hear that nice sizzle. And I'm used to cooking, so I can tell by listening that it's a little warmer than I would like, so I'm turning down the heat a bit. What we're aiming for is to get some translucence in the onions. We really want to avoid browning them. If you get a little browning, it's okay, but if you brown it too much, it will bring a bitter flavor to the dish. And then I'll add a pinch of salt that will release some of the moisture from the onions. You can avoid using salt if you really want to make this as low sodium as possible. But again, it really does help to bring out the flavors. I'm using small amounts. I am using a kosher salt, and this is a little bit flakier, so each pinch would have less sodium than, say, iodized or table salt, which is more of a round granule. It doesn't matter which salt you use, just pick something that you're used to so that you know about how much saltiness that you're adding with each pinch, and just be consistent with it. Okay. And so since I know my next ingredient, the sweet potatoes, which are medium or large diced, however, it really doesn't matter, however big of a piece you want in your finished curry, I'll add those in. We're going to saute these for a few minutes just to kind of get them to start warming up before we add our other ingredients. And honestly, this is not, if you want to just move forward and add your ingredients, you could do that as well. There are often many right ways to cook something or chop something, as long as you're doing it safely. Whatever works better for you is fine. Now that we added more ingredients here, then it cools down the pot. So you might see yourself adjusting up the temperature to keep things warm. Add another little pinch of salt to bring out the flavor of that ingredient. And then, okay, we'll pause on talking about some of the ingredients because we're going to add some of the other ones here because everything's warmed up in our pan. So what you want to do is you want to clear out the center of the pot so that there's some metal showing, because we want to add some of our spices and really bloom them. This does work best if you've had that little bit of oil in there, but if not, it's okay. Then we would consider it dry toasting if you were doing it, say, with the stock version. I do have some brown mustard seeds. If you just have yellow, which is more commonly found in most grocery stores, that's fine. It's still gonna add a very similar flavor. The brown mustard seed or black mustard seed is more traditional in South Asian cooking. And then we also have some whole cumin seed. And this is used in Latin cooking and South Asian cooking, Middle Eastern cooking. Cumin is a really nice spice to get if you are trying to just begin building your spice pantry and you're not ready to spend a whole bunch of money on many ingredients. And on that same note, if you really wanted to leave the mustard seed out, it's okay. We're gonna get a lot of the flavor of the curry is gonna come from the curry powder, which is, if you're just starting out with your spice pantry, getting some powdered spice mixes is a good way to start, because you know that you're gonna be adding some good depth of flavor without having to buy a lot of spices individually. So that's why we're using a pre-made curry powder in this program rather than making our own from scratch. Another note on the curry powder. So the curry powder is yellow from a root called turmeric, and that's has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, and it is mainly going to add the color. The other ingredients in the curry powder are going to add a lot of the flavor. So there's some cumin, some coriander. Usually there's some cardamom, there could be some cinnamon or cloves. There's really a wide variety of spices in there. Then I have some brown sugar. So you'll see in a lot of these recipes, even though we are tending to go very light on sugar in anything, since a large amount of added sugar isn't necessarily part of a healthy diet, we use sugar a lot to adjust flavoring. So I actually save this till last, even though it's written a little bit earlier in the recipe, because you may have really sweet ingredients, so maybe your tomatoes are extra sweet and you might not need it. So I add that toward the end when I'm trying to balance out the flavors. And my curry powder. And the heat actually helps release some of the oils that are in those spices, and that's going to bring out a lot more flavor. So if we just waited until we had added our liquids and then just dumped the spices in, it's not going to have nearly as much flavor. And this is a common technique in South Asian cooking. But I would say, you know, now that I've learned it in the context of that, you know, cooking tradition, I use it in a lot of other types of cooking, and it really does bring out a lot more flavor. You do have to be careful. If you have it up too high, these dry spices can burn. So when they start to stick, you want to stir things around. And then a couple of other things we're going to add are some minced up ginger, some minced garlic. And then another thing I'm going to save for later is this cayenne pepper. That really doesn't add a lot of flavor. It adds mostly spice. So it's really going to depend on how spicy your curry powder is, how much spice you like, whether you're going to add that or not, or how much of that you're going to add. All right, now everything's starting to stick a little bit, but it's not burning, so we're in good shape. We're going to add our chickpeas. If you have really big pieces of sweet potato, I would recommend that you simmer this for a few minutes before adding the cauliflower. We cut the cauliflower extra big so that it will finish about the same time as the sweet potato. So I'll actually go ahead and add that as well. And then we'll add our red bell pepper. So the next thing you want to do is deglaze this. So we're going to take some of our stock. I'm using vegetable stock. You can hear that sizzle. I just put a couple tablespoons of stock in there. That will allow me to scrape up all the bits that were sticking to the bottom, bring all that flavor into our curry. Whenever possible, I do try to add a rainbow of colors to the dishes that I'm making. Not only does it make it interesting and beautiful, but you get different antioxidants, different vitamins and minerals from different colors of plants. So that's a good gauge, even without knowing a lot of nutrition, about whether you're getting a good mix of things there. Green bell pepper. And then the other liquid ingredient that we're going to add is some tomato sauce. This is not a traditional ingredient in most curry. A lot of curry will have some diced tomato that you might put in a little bit closer toward the end or cook into the sauce. The reason that we're using this tomato sauce, and I'm using a low sodium tomato sauce, is that it's going to give us some creaminess, but it's going to reduce the amount of coconut milk that we need to use later. And coconut milk is very delicious, but it's very rich and very high in saturated fat and just very high in calories. So I know that a lot of people are very skeptical when they see me make this and add the tomato sauce, but every single person that's been skeptical and tried it at the end said that they thought it was really delicious, and there's no way they would have guessed that, you know, part of the sauce was tomato sauce. Tomato sauce is much lower in calorie, you know, really no fat in it at all. And a note on the sodium, though, tomato products in cans can be very high in salt. So if you're getting one that's not low sodium or no salt added, you will want to make sure that you taste it before you start adding a bunch of salt, because it can really get oversalted pretty quickly. And then we can add the rest of our stock. Add that. All right, now we're going to turn up the heat. We really want to bring this up to a full boil and then turn it down to a simmer. You want to always bring things up to a higher heat than you're going to leave them out, and then turn it down. Then you know that when you step away and you're letting it simmer for the 15 minutes or so that it needs to simmer at the stove, that it's not going to boil over. And you'll have to account for putting the lid on too. So we put the lid on, you know, to capture some of the steam that's coming up from the vegetables as they cook down. Then we will want to make sure we put it even a little bit lower so the heat doesn't build up with the lid on and boil over. The other thing that we need to do with this is anything with tomato products in it, because there are some natural sugars in the tomatoes, can burn to the bottom. So you don't want to let it simmer for 15 minutes and not stir it at all. You want to make sure to come back every couple minutes, give it a good stir. This is not a high maintenance recipe, but it's something you want to stay in the kitchen for. So maybe you're, you know, getting your table set or working on something else, or just nearby where you can stir it occasionally. So let's see. Right, so we're getting just a little bubbles. This isn't quite at a simmer. A simmer is a little bit more vigorous bubbling. And so if you've heard of, we're not covering it in this program, but if you've heard of poaching, that would be about just barely bubbling, like what we're doing. And this wouldn't be something you would poach, but a lot of, say, fish recipes use poaching. Boiling would be a very vigorous bubbling, and simmer is right in between poaching and boiling. This is going to be something that's really great for a nice cold day, if it's overcast or cloudy where you are. So it's really satisfying. And this is something that I would tend to serve with a whole grain. Or if if you're someone who's really trying to cut down on carbohydrates, you could serve it with cauliflower rice. Instead of putting the cauliflower in, you could put it in a food processor, blend it up until it's just little tiny pieces about the size of grains of rice. And then you can just microwave that